Hello and welcome. One of the most special parts of my job as an interviewer is each year we have interviewed the Teacher of the Year in Minnesota. And tonight we're going to talk with the 2022 teacher who had that wonderful honor just very recently. My guest is Sarah Lancaster. You may have seen some articles about her in the papers. We've learned some about your background just from the press, but we should mention one of the unique and special things that you bring to us is you are the first Asian American Pacific Islander to have this recognition.
Yes.
So,
yep.
With that, Sarah, does that bring a sense of pressure at all?
I think it brings the opportunity to give a bigger voice to a platform that maybe hasn't been recognized as of late, or just giving people the ability to see themselves reflected in these leadership roles. I think that's tough, especially with all of the issues that we've had in the last couple of years with Asian American people receiving a bit of people lashing out or a little bit of
Discrimination,
kickback.
really.
Yeah.
I've been very puzzled by the discrimination and kind of, pondering why now and, what's going on. And it's got to be worrisome and kind of hanging over your head to some degree, even though Onamia is probably a very safe place to live.
I have actually experienced a bit in Onamia and locally a little bit north in Brainerd, which is about 45 minutes north. I remember one specific incident where I was at a grocery store and I went to go use my card and the chip reader wasn't working, which happens to us.
Sure.
But I remember I tried it a few times and it didn't work, and there was a gentleman, probably two people behind me, and he called out some pretty derogatory racial slurs, and this was just in front of everyone. So I remember I just took out a different card, paid for my groceries, and left. But that was odd to me because the kind of person that I am, I'm a confident, successful young woman. I feel like I should have said something, or I would have said something, and instead all I did was took my groceries, threw them in my car, and cried. And so then I just think about moments like that where people maybe didn't have the voice, and I didn't have the voice, and maybe
And if you didn't,
how do these
other
other
people?
Yeah. I've been
wouldn't.
refused service at the local Dollar General in my town. That was something that happened.
I'm sorry, say that again.
I was refused service at the
you
local
were?
Dollar General in my town. And so we actually reached out to corporate to ask them to review the discrimination training, because when I took this to social media, which is one of the platforms I decided to use, I posted that what had happened at the store that night, how I was told, I don't serve people that look like you. You can go to the next counter or get out. I took to social media, and the feedback I got from community members was so heartbreaking, but also uplifting, because there were parents saying, my child was kicked out of that store, or my child was told that they needed to be pat down, my child was called a thief. And I thought, this is happening to so many people in our community.
And where is the store?
Right in Onamia.
Right in Onamia.
Yep.
Oh.
And that individual no longer works there. I don't know if that was by choice or if it was choice of people above him in management.
Some pressure.
But it brought a lot of what was happening in our community to light, and it let people know that they're not alone, that this is happening, and then the way to address it is to speak out, to communicate, and then we can take action, and then we can educate.
So from your experience when you didn't have a voice, it was in a way then preparation for now being more prepared, it sounds like, to do something, say something. I should tell you that Sarah has so many things that she is doing besides being a first grade teacher, and I don't even think I told you that, but she's the president of the Onamia Area Civic Association, or was up until 2020, right?
No, I'm currently serving.
Oh, you
as,
still are?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yep. We actually had our last meeting at City Hall last Monday, so we meet every month on the second Monday.
So if this happens to the president of the Civic Association.
Yeah.
I mean, there is, yeah.
That says something about
It does.
about what people need to learn, or what people are experiencing in our town, that it doesn't matter your race or your ethnicity or your socioeconomic status, because he had no idea any of those things about me except for what he saw in front of him.
In the town of Onamia, it's, I was just double checking the population. It's 840.
Yep.
840. Are there many minority students and no other teachers, I know, but what about students?
We actually border the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe Reservation.
Yeah, I was thinking you.
Yeah, so we have a very high Native American student population. We're about 58%. We do have about in between 2 and 4% African American students. We have an Asian student population. So there is a mix of diverse student population in Onamia. So I do get to work with a diverse student population.
And that's got to be special.
Yes.
And feel good.
Yes.
Is there any pressure from the townspeople to hire more teachers that would reflect the diversity of the students?
There absolutely is. And I think that's statewide. I think all of Minnesota is trying to figure out, how do we hire or how do we find these teachers of
Right.
color?
I know we're doing that here in the Twin Cities.
Yes. I know that the percentage of teachers of color in 2010 was about 5%. And even now in 2022, we're still just under 6%. We're in between 5 and 6%.
For the whole state.
Yep.
I think in the Twin Cities it's maybe 10%, but that's very low, in terms of the student population.
Yeah.
Minority kids.
And I know that looking at those percentages, we know that it hasn't changed much, even in the
Right.
last decade. So I think, and I don't think it's for lack of not hiring educators of color. I think it's that we don't have enough people of color going into the field of education. So how do we get them to take that path and to step
Yes.
into these leadership roles? Because there's so much talent, there are so many people out there. We just need to form those connections and get them on the path so that we can get them in the classroom.
As a teacher of the year now, maybe that's going to be, one of the things that you'll have a little more power to probably influence.
I hope
which
so.
is exciting to think about. Well, tell us some about teaching first graders. I'm sure many people in the audience are thinking, oh my gosh, that would be the hardest year. They're squirmy, they're
There's something, yeah, it's a
having
wild
a
ride.
long time staying or hard time staying for a long day. And what's it like for you as their teacher?
Honestly, I think the younger the student, sometimes it is the more difficult to teach. I could never imagine teaching preschool, teaching 3 and 4-year-olds. I bless the people that do it. But even teaching first grade, so much relies on consistency in the classroom and just being there for the kids and establishing the relationship. And also understanding that sometimes students aren't just learning the academics, they're just learning how to be in school. And so encouraging things like social play and conflict resolution and how to process emotions, those things are equally as important as math or reading or writing.
I think kids do really need to learn how to be social with other kids if they came from a family that was, either they were one-child family or, many different variables, I guess. But learning to be social, I bet, is one of your challenges, or helping the kids learn that.
I think the thing that helps the most is just open communication. You hear that little kids will ask why. They'll ask why 100 times. But if you take the time to answer them, soon they'll start understanding and asking less, or find ways to find the answer themselves. And so you kind of teach kids to problem solve and to get the answer and to be curious and not stifle that curiosity, but lead them to ways that they can successfully understand what's happening around them. So I think that's one of the things that takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of practice, because I am a very different teacher now in year 9 than I was in year 1 or even year 3 or 5.
Yes, I don't think we mentioned, or I mentioned, that 2013 was your first year
Yes.
in Onamia. So you grew up in Onamia, you went to school there, you came back to teach there. And I can see as I look at your eyes as you talk about your teaching, how they sparkle and how you love it. What's the hardest thing, though, about being a first grade teacher?
I think it's understanding that there are things I can't control. There are things that happen to my students outside of the classroom. There are things that they bring with them, and understanding that they might carry those things with them throughout the school day, and I'm trying to reach them despite all of that. They've got all of these barriers. They might suffer from neglect or abuse. They might be hungry. They might have things that they're thinking about, you know, are mom and dad going to fight tonight? Is mom going to be home tonight? So they're thinking about all of those things, and here I am pushing addition at them. So how do we expect a student to carry all of that and still take on what I'm asking them to do in the classroom? So I have to be very mindful.
How do you reach that child who's maybe sitting with a heavy heart, so to speak, because of a fight he saw at home? Or
I think I had a student this year, and we were sitting in circle time, and we were working with our math. They're like an abacus. We call them number racks, and they have little beads, and they use them to add. And this child was squirming, and you know, I reached over and I said, "Hey, buddy, what's going on?" And he says, "My feet feel weird." And I said, "Okay, like, do you need to take your socks off, or do you need to check your shoes? Are there wood chips in there?" And he said, "No, I think it's my socks." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "My socks make my feet feel like they're whispering." And I thought, okay, well, I don't really know how to help you with that. But then it made me think about how many kids in that circle are wearing a pair of whispering socks. How many of them have something going on that I am completely unaware of? How many of them have something I don't know how to help them get through? And so then I remind myself to be cognizant of every student and what they're going through, and just communicating with them, because I said, you know, why don't you try taking your shoes and socks off? We'll put them back on and we'll see if that helps. And he seemed satisfied with that. But just having that open communication and allowing my students to talk about their needs and talk about what they're going through in whatever capacity makes sense to them. That's how I help my students and support them through the school day as best I can.
one of the things you shared just briefly with me before we started taping was that you grew up in a family that wasn't always just the Leave It to Beaver family. And you feel that that's given you some extra empathy, it sounds like.
Absolutely. I grew up in my teenage years. I was in a single parent household. I know there were some issues with mental health illness in my family, and so understanding what I went through and still being able to connect to my kids and see them, let them see someone in a leadership role, let them see a teacher who says, hey, I don't have a dad, but that's okay. And letting them think, okay, well, maybe that's how I could turn out too, or maybe that's something I could do myself, despite the fact that I don't have a dad, despite the fact that maybe my teacher does deal with mental health issues. And so it's so important for students to see themselves reflected in the people they look up to.
That makes so much sense. Yeah, I would think that would be very comforting and inspiring to a young 6-year-old. President Biden was really pushing when he was working, trying to get his big bill through this past fall to get universal preschool for 3- and 4-year-olds.
Yes.
What were your thoughts about that bill and the importance of that experience for children before kindergarten and 1st grade?
So we are actually so fortunate in our school building to have free 4-year-old full-day preschool, which is amazing. And we have partial 3-year-old, so we have 3-year-olds attend 2 days a week for half days. And just, I could take a class into 1st grade and I could tell you which kids were in 4-year-old
Really?
preschool. Absolutely.
Because of
The social development, just the ability to know how to be in school. I mean, there's so much more than just coming into the school building and existing. There's knowing how to interact with other children. There's knowing how to follow a schedule. There's knowing how to navigate the school building and get to the bathroom. And it's such a different game when it's primary students.
So do you think that it would be something the government should do across the board, all states,
Absolutely.
as much as possible.
And there's been quite a regression in the availability of childcare in Minnesota. I know in the town of Onamia, there is one daycare that my son attends, and there's 15 children at that daycare. So if I wanted to bring him to another daycare, I would have to drive at least 20 miles
Oh my
to bring him to
goodness.
another one. So that'd be 20 miles south and then back north again to work
And that would be twice a day, wouldn't it?
twice a day.
Oh, so your day would get really squeezed.
Yes.
So one in Onamia, yeah, that's a sign that we need more daycare, isn't it?
Yes, or child, just
or preschool.
preschool and childcare. Absolutely.
What about the child who is intellectually ready to start school, but physically maybe not ready?
I see that a lot.
Do you?
I see parents who say, you know, my kid is so ready to start kindergarten and then they're 4, or they're ready to start 4-year-old preschool and they're 3. And being a parent of a 2.5-year-old and just missing the cutoff by a month and a half
Oh, did you?
to start 4-year-old preschool, you know, I feel that sense of urgency mostly because there is that lack of childcare, but knowing that the difference might not be as a parent in that first year, but by the time they get to 2nd or 3rd grade, you can pretty easily tell the lack of social development, the lack of, you know, just being able to be on the same level as their peers. One of the things I note a lot is imaginative play. And so I can see just the maturity level in my classroom. There'll be a group who are, you know, doing the imaginative play with Legos and Lincoln Logs, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's wonderful for children. But then on the other side, you've got kids who are playing board games, more organized play. And so that kind of distinguishes the difference between maturity levels. And more often than not, the younger, you can pick out the children who were born in the fall, the children who were born during late summer, and they're off playing the board games, and the children who were born in late spring will be doing more of the imaginative play.
Interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating. In first grade, are you working on reading as a primary skill right now?
Yes, so when they are in kindergarten, they actually, what we would like to see, what Minnesota state standards expect, is that a student comes in knowing all of their letters and letter sounds and can read simple structured sentences. So repetitive sentences, sight words, there's a list of 30 sight words. And I think it's important for parents to know that and support that in the household. We need literacy-rich houses, you know, homes where children have exposure to books or are read stories and experience their parents enjoying literature. And that's so important for children.
Did you have that, Sarah, yourself? Did you grow up with books all around? Did that?
I did, and my siblings were wonderful, and they read to me often. My mother did not have English as her first language, so reading was actually kind of difficult. When she came to the United States from the Philippines, she did not speak English, and she still speaks with a very heavy accent. She doesn't sometimes know the English words, so when she's speaking, sometimes she'll slip back into her first language, and so it was a unique experience growing up in a household where English wasn't spoken all the time.
She must be so proud of you as Teacher of the Year.
Absolutely, she is. Yes, and we had an assembly today just recognizing the school and just giving the award from the state, and my mom was there. She wasn't able to be at the banquet on May 1st, but she was able to be there for that award ceremony, and she was so proud of me.
Oh, well, that's great. She could come today.
Yes.
Just for fun, I wanted to ask you, when you're at the banquet on May 1st, and you're one of the finalists, right? You knew that.
Yes.
What was going through your head, and how did it feel when you heard your name?
I almost felt like what I imagine a student in Onamia feels like, because I thought, no way. I'm from this small town. You know, we're not big on the map. We're not in the news. We're not recognized for any of these things. And I'm up against 7 city teachers. I mean, there was one from Moose Lake. There was one from Brainerd. There was one from kind of outside of the cities. But I thought, how do I stand a chance against any of these schools that are so recognized by the state of Minnesota? And so, and I shouldn't have viewed it that way, but you know, I was worried that Onamia was a limitation, but I spoke today and I said, Onamia is not the limitation, it's the foundation. and it
And
set
again,
me up.
that's inspiring for all your people in Onamia, isn't it?
Yes, and when I went up on stage and when they called my name, I was so overwhelmed. And I just remember going up on stage and thinking, this is Onamia going on stage. This isn't just me. I'm the voice of everyone who's ever taught me or coached me or was part of my journey growing up. So it was such an honor to bring them up with me.
That's, I can imagine. I can just picture what it would have been like. Online learning is something you had to struggle with and deal with during the pandemic. Could you go back to that if we had another surge? What was it like teaching first graders online?
I think the most important thing was to provide an equitable education for all students, regardless of their availability to education. So some of my students didn't have internet, and some of my students didn't have a parent at home with them. So that was one of the toughest things I encountered, was that a 6-year-old can't log on a computer and go into Google Meets or log on and complete all of their assignments themselves. So I had to really find a way to get creative, and our school was wonderful in providing internet to all families who didn't have access, providing Chromebooks one-to-one to each student. But then I also sent home, we had like these boxes, and we called them distance learning boxes, and every week we would send home work for our students. And so a lot of teachers would put in packets, you know, the worksheets and that, but I was the teacher who was putting in bags of cornmeal and tinfoil and art supplies, and
I read you put in a pineapple.
a whole pineapple. We
year,
did
or
Hawaii week,
one
and
week.
I remember I went to the grocery store and I bought 26 whole pineapples. My husband was with me, and there was this woman ahead of us, and she said, "What do you need so many pineapples for?" And I said, "I'm a teacher," and she said, "Okay," like that was just commonplace. Like, oh, she's a teacher, of course she needs 26 pineapples.
Oh, wow.
So I really made sure, because my students learn so kinesthetically. If they don't have it in their hands, it's almost meaningless to them. I mean, we could talk through a computer all day long, but if they don't see that connection and they don't feel that connection and see those materials in their hands and say, hey, Mrs. Lancaster said she's sending pineapples next week, and it shows up on their doorstep, that created more of a connection than I ever could have hoped for.
I'm guessing some of the kids maybe wouldn't have an adult that could help them with the computer logging in and so forth. Maybe would have a sibling home with them, but I can just imagine there were some unique, hard circumstances
There
for
were.
you.
Yeah, and knowing that if a sibling was helping them, then it was taking away from their education too, so that was tough. And we kind of spent the first few weeks, instead of practicing how to be in school, you know, lining up and learning where things are in our school building and learning how to interact with peers, we learned how do we log onto a computer? How do we get to our website? So we kind of had to transition the way we taught and what we taught to fit what we had available to us at that time.
Did you find it draining and exhausting?
It was, I remember I talked to my husband and I said, my mental health is at a place where it has never been. It was sitting alone in a room on a computer for 8 hours, and it was very difficult.
And
But
probably worrying about so many of the kids in terms of, are they getting this? You know, you didn't have that feedback you'd have in the classroom.
yeah, and I remember thinking, if this is the toll on my mental health, what are they feeling?
Yeah.
How are they able to navigate this and still be in a place where they can learn and grow, and that social interaction piece that's so important, they weren't getting any of it. So we had to find really unique, creative ways, online games, connecting through Google Meet phone calls, and we did a few gatherings outdoors, and I remember scheduling those, and the kids were so excited to meet in person, and you know, we did the social distancing outside so that we had a safe environment, but it was so unique to meet in person when we could.
Sounds like you got really creative and handled it well. We're almost out of time. I'd like to ask you 2 quick questions with just maybe 1-sentence answers.
Sure.
Did you support the striking teachers this past, April?
I did. I think the fact that they were advocating for equal pay for their support staff was invaluable. I mean, we need the community. We need a village. We need all of these different components, lunch ladies or lunch workers and people who work in the office and people who work our custodial staff. It takes everyone. Yes.
I thought you would be pro-strike, but I want to double check. And then last question, Sarah. For a goal that is at the sort of top of your list for your work as you give speeches and meet with people around the state, what would you say is your top goal?
I think my top goal is to address the mental health crisis that's occurring across the United States. It has reached a critical level of need. 55% of educators are thinking about leaving.
Oh my, I had heard 28%.
According to a survey in February of 2022 by National Education Association, 55% of educators. Who's that going to leave for our kids?
Oh, that's so worrisome, isn't it?
It is.
Well, that's a wonderful goal. Well, thank you so much. I've just really found it fascinating to hear how you've navigated the challenges, and I'm so pleased that you got the award. I can see that it's wonderfully deserving.
Thank you.
Congrats.
And thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure you enjoyed getting to know Sarah like I did. Have a good week, and I will see you next week.